Hello, my name is Ann Mason. I am the Executive Director of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society. This is the fourth video in a 5-part series on gravestone epitaphs and iconography, filmed on Burial Hill in historic Plymouth, Massachusetts. I'm in the section of the graveyard that's closest to Plymouth Town Hall, which you can see behind me. And at the start of this section, I want to focus on this small slate stone quite close to the ground, so let's swivel around and take a closer look. This is the grave of Abigail and Ebenezer Leach, the children of Caleb and Abigail Leach, who died, Abigail on December 24th, 1795, when she was 10, and Ebenezer on January 31st, 1796, when he was 13. Now, the proximity of their deaths indicates that they died during one of the epidemics that swept through Plymouth, possibly of something like scarlet fever or diphtheria. At the top of the headstone, we can see a familiar symbol, the winged cherub, and in between, an ornate urn. In the period after the American Revolution, classicism influenced art and architecture, and designs from ancient Rome and Greece were used even to design gravestones. The urn becomes a predominant motif of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The urn was used by the Romans as a container to hold the ashes of the cremated deceased. You can see at the top of this urn that there looks to be a puff of smoke coming out. Sometimes people refer to that as a spirit puff. On other gravestones, it might look more like a flame, and that symbolizes the soul of the deceased going to heaven. So we have a combination here of the winged cherub and the classical urn. Now we're going to stand up and walk a little bit to a closer gravestone where we can see another urn design. This is the grave of Simeon Sampson, who died in 1789. And you can see that this urn is rather bulbous. It doesn't look like the urn on the Leach grave at all. And it's actually large enough that it encloses the inscription. Next to the urn, we see this strange tree. And that is probably meant to be a willow tree, since the willow was often paired with the urn in this period as a symbol of mourning. The willow is an ancient symbol of mourning, and paired with the urn, it connects these gravestones to a new culture of mourning that springs up in the late 18th century and early 19th century. You may be familiar with mourning practices like wearing black for a designated time. You may have seen mourning pictures created in needlework that also use an urn motif. Now I want to show you a couple of other stones that also have the urn and willow design on them. We're going to walk across the path. And this beautifully cleaned gravestone is very easy to read, and you can see the beautiful carving here that shows a very weeping willow that almost hides the urn behind it. Again, the willow and the urn paired as a symbol of mourning. This is the gravestone of Elizabeth Savory, who is the wife of Lemuel Savory. She died in August of 1831 when she was 71 years old. And this gravestone bears a verse at the bottom. It reads, "Remember me as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, you soon must be. Prepare for death to follow me." Now this was a very common verse for gravestones. It was often included. No one knows the origins of it. It appears in many different forms in many different generations. But we do have this beautiful weeping willow and urn, and a verse that almost reminds us of the earlier sentiments we saw in some of those 18th century gravestones that talks about remembering death, memento mori, the inevitability of death. Your life will end. Don't forget that. So when you walk in this graveyard, be prepared. Think about how you can be prepared. Now let's just walk back to the row behind Elizabeth's gravestone. We see some other nice examples of the urn and willow motif On this stone, it almost looks more like a sarcophagus or a tomb. And we can move over here, where instead of having a willow beside it, the urn is by itself. And again, some scholars might identify this carving detail at the top as a flame coming out of the urn itself, representing the soul's flight to heaven.